The first thing Grace felt was the cold air on her skin. It made her shiver. Her eyelids fluttered slowly as a dull ache pulsed through her head. The room around her was quiet except for the faint hum of an air conditioner and the distant sound of traffic somewhere far below. Sunlight leaked through heavy hotel curtains, casting pale streaks across the bed. Grace groaned softly and shifted. Something felt wrong. Her head throbbed like she had slept for days without rest. She tried to remember how she got here, but her thoughts were cloudy, like a dream she couldn't quite grasp. "Where am I?" she murmured to herself. Her voice sounded hoarse. She pushed herself up slightly, and that's when she noticed it. The blanket had slipped down. Her heart skipped. She was completely uncovered beneath the sheets. For a moment she froze, staring down at herself in disbelief. What? Her breathing grew faster. This wasn't her apartment. The bed was too large. The room too luxurious. The faint scent of expensive cologne hung in the air. Panic began creeping into her chest. Then she felt it. Warmth beside her. Someone else was lying in the bed. Her entire body stiffened instantly. Slowly, very slowly, she turned her head. And her heart almost stopped. A man lay beside her, still asleep. Tall. Broad-shouldered. His dark hair slightly messy against the pillow. His face was calm, almost intimidating even in sleep. Grace's eyes widened. She recognized him immediately. It was Kang Jiho. The name alone was enough to make people in business circles whisper. He was known across Seoul as a powerful corporate figure, wealthy, influential, mysterious. And somehow, she had woken up in his bed. Grace quickly grabbed the sheet and wrapped it tightly around her body. "Oh my God, she whispered under her breath. Her mind raced desperately. Think, Grace. Think. Last night. She tried to rewind the memories. There had been a small celebration at a restaurant with coworkers. She had just received her promotion at the company. Everyone was cheering. Laughing. Someone ordered drinks. Her coworker Vanessa had handed her a glass. "Grace, tonight we celebrate big," Vanessa had said with a bright smile. Grace remembered taking a sip. Then another. The rest was blank. Nothing. Just darkness. Her stomach twisted painfully. Something was very wrong. She glanced back at Kang Jiho. He was still asleep, breathing slowly, completely unaware of the storm unfolding beside him. Grace carefully slid off the bed, trying not to wake him. Her legs felt slightly weak as her feet touched the floor. Clothes. She needed her clothes. She spotted them scattered across a nearby chair and hurried over, clutching the sheet tightly around herself. Just as she reached for them, the hotel room door suddenly burst open. The loud sound made her jump. Standing in the doorway was a man she knew better than anyone. Philip. Her boyfriend. For a brief moment, time seemed to freeze. Philip stood there, breathing hard as if he had rushed upstairs. In his hand was a small velvet box. Grace's heart skipped. She recognized it instantly. A ring box. Philip had been planning to propose. Her chest tightened. But the hopeful expression on his face disappeared the moment his eyes landed on the bed behind her. On Kang Jiho. Sleeping. Then Philip looked at Grace. Wrapped only in a sheet. His face slowly drained of color. The silence in the room became suffocating. Grace stepped forward quickly. "Philip, wait, this isn't what it looks like." But he didn't move. His eyes were filled with shock. And something worse. Hurt. Deep, crushing hurt. "What is this?" he asked quietly. The velvet box trembled slightly in his hand. Grace's voice shook. "I don't know how I got here, I swear." Before she could finish, the box slipped from Philip's fingers. It hit the floor softly. The ring rolled across the polished tiles, spinning in slow circles before finally stopping near the bed. Philip stared at it for a moment. Then he looked back at her. The disappointment in his eyes cut deeper than any words. "I was going to propose to you today," he said quietly. Grace felt her heart shatter. "Philip, please." But he had already turned toward the door. "Don't," he said softly without looking back. The single word carried so much pain it made her chest ache. Then he walked out. The door slammed shut behind him. The sound echoed loudly in the room. Grace stood frozen, clutching the sheet around her body as tears filled her eyes. Her perfect morning. The proposal she had been dreaming about. The future she had imagined with Philip. All of it had just collapsed in a matter of seconds. Behind her, Kang Jiho stirred slightly in his sleep, unaware that a life had just been torn apart in the room he lay in. And Grace could only stand there, shaking, asking herself one terrifying question. What exactly happened last night? The room fell into a heavy silence after the door slammed. Grace stood frozen in the middle of the hotel suite, clutching the white sheet tightly around her body as if it were the only thing holding her together. Her chest rose and fell rapidly. Tears blurred her vision as Philip's words echoed painfully in her head. I was going to propose to you today. The image of the ring rolling across the floor replayed again and again in her mind. She suddenly dropped to her knees beside it. Her fingers trembled as she picked it up. The diamond sparkled in the morning light. It should have been one of the happiest moments of her life. Instead, it felt like proof of everything she had just lost. A quiet groan behind her made her freeze. The man on the bed stirred. Grace quickly wiped her tears and turned around. Kang Jiho shifted slightly, his brows tightening as if he was fighting a headache. Then slowly, his eyes opened. For a few seconds, he simply stared at the ceiling, trying to gather his thoughts. His expression looked confused. Then he sat up slightly and winced, pressing a hand to his temple. Why does my head feel like I've been hit by a truck? He muttered under his breath. Grace stood there awkwardly, unsure what to say. Jiho finally noticed her. His gaze moved slowly toward the woman standing near the bed, wrapped in a sheet. His eyebrows furrowed. The confusion in his eyes deepened. Who are you? He asked calmly. The question caught Grace off guard. My name is Grace, she replied nervously. Jiho blinked once, then looked around the room. His sharp eyes took in the scattered clothes, the 2 glasses sitting on the nightstand, and the open door that had just been slammed moments ago. Something about the situation clearly wasn't normal. Grace spoke quickly, her voice shaking. I swear I don't know how I got here. Jiho studied her for a moment. She looked frightened. Not guilty. Not seductive. Just confused. He leaned back against the headboard slowly. I was about to ask the same question, he said. He glanced at the nightstand and reached for one of the glasses. He sniffed it slightly before placing it back down. Then he looked at his own reflection in the mirror across the room. His hair was messy. His shirt was missing. And his memory was almost completely blank. The realization made his expression darken slightly. That's strange, he murmured. Grace shifted uncomfortably. What do you mean? Jiho turned his gaze back to her. I rarely drink enough to lose memory. His voice was calm but thoughtful. But last night, I remember attending a business event downstairs in this hotel. He paused, thinking. There was music. A few investors. Drinks. His brows tightened. And then, nothing. The blank space in his memory bothered him. Grace swallowed nervously. The last thing I remember was celebrating with my co-workers, she said softly. Jiho nodded slightly. Then we share the same problem. Silence settled between them again. Grace looked toward the door. Philip's face flashed through her mind. The disappointment. The heartbreak. Tears began forming in her eyes again. My boyfriend, she whispered. Jiho followed her gaze to the floor. That's when he noticed something lying near the door. A small velvet box. He leaned forward and picked it up. Opening it slowly, he saw the diamond ring inside. Jiho raised an eyebrow slightly. This belongs to your boyfriend. Grace nodded weakly. He was supposed to propose today. Jiho closed the box quietly. And instead, he walked into this situation. The weight of those words filled the room. Grace covered her face with her hands. I just ruined the most important relationship in my life, she said, her voice cracking. I don't even know what happened, but he thinks I cheated. Jiho watched her carefully. Her reaction didn't feel like an act. People who lie often defend themselves loudly. But she looked genuinely shattered. That caught his attention. Jiho leaned back thoughtfully. Something about this doesn't feel right. Grace lowered her hands. What do you mean? Jiho gestured toward the glasses on the nightstand. There are 2 drinks. He pointed to the door. And according to the hotel system, someone opened my suite door last night. Grace's heart began beating faster. But you don't remember inviting me. Jiho shook his head. No. A quiet realization passed between them. Grace's stomach twisted. You think someone brought me here? Jiho nodded slowly. It's possible. Her breathing became unsteady. But why would someone do that? Jiho stared at the ring box in his hand again. Then he placed it gently on the table. Let's think about the timing, he said calmly. You wake up beside a stranger. Your boyfriend walks in with a proposal ring. And the relationship is instantly destroyed.
He looked back at her.
Who benefits from that? The question sent a chill through Grace's body.
Her mind immediately drifted to someone. Vanessa. Her coworker.
The woman who had always been strangely friendly toward Philip.
Too friendly. Grace's eyes widened slightly. No.
Jiho noticed the shift in her expression. You thought of someone.
Grace hesitated. I'm not sure, she said slowly.
But there's one person who has always disliked me.
Jiho folded his arms thoughtfully.
Well, he said calmly, if someone planned this.
His sharp gaze hardened slightly. Then we'll find out who.
For the first time since waking up in that terrifying situation, Grace felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe she hadn't lost everything after all.
Maybe the truth was still out there,
waiting to be uncovered.
Philip drove through the city without knowing exactly where he was going.
The morning traffic blurred around him as his car moved through the busy streets, but he barely noticed any of it.
His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. Too tightly. His mind kept replaying the same scene over and over again. Grace standing in that hotel room, wrapped only in a sheet. Another man in the bed behind her.
The memory felt like someone had carved it into his mind. Every time he blinked, he saw it again.
He had imagined that morning so differently.
For months, he had been planning it. Saving for the ring.
Practicing what he would say.
Even asking Grace's closest friend about the perfect place to propose. Everything had been carefully prepared. The restaurant reservation. The flowers. The small celebration they would have afterward. He had pictured the smile on her face when he asked the question.
But instead, he saw her with another man.
Philip suddenly slammed his hand against the steering wheel. Damn it, he muttered under his breath.
The car slowed as he pulled into an empty parking lot near a quiet park. He turned off the engine and leaned back in his seat.
The silence inside the car felt heavy. His chest tightened as emotions battled inside him.
Anger.
Hurt. Confusion.
And something even worse. Doubt. His phone buzzed on the passenger seat. He didn't need to look to know who it was.
Still, after a moment, he picked it up.
Grace. Calling again. This was the 7th time.
He stared at the screen as the phone vibrated in his hand.
Part of him wanted to answer. Part of him didn't want to hear anything she had to say. The call stopped.
A few seconds later, a message appeared.
Philip opened it slowly.
Philip, please.
I swear I don't know how I ended up there. Another message followed almost immediately.
I would never cheat on you. Philip stared at the words for a long moment.
His jaw tightened. People say that all the time.
But something about the way she looked that morning kept bothering him. Grace had looked shocked. Not guilty. Not defensive. Just confused. Philip sighed heavily and ran his hand through his hair. This doesn't make any sense, he murmured to himself.
His phone buzzed again. Another message. Please talk to me. I'm begging you. Philip closed his eyes. He remembered the first day he met her. 2 years ago. It was at a small cafe near his office. She had accidentally spilled coffee on his shirt while rushing out the door. She had been so embarrassed that she insisted on buying him another drink. He remembered how nervous she looked while apologizing. But also how warm her smile was. That was the moment he knew she was different. Grace had always been honest with him. Always kind. She had supported him during the toughest times in his career. She had been the person who believed in him when he doubted himself. Which made what he saw that morning even harder to accept. Philip opened his eyes and stared at the steering wheel. You don't accidentally wake up in another man's bed, he said quietly. But even as he said the words, something felt wrong about them. His mind returned to her face again. She had looked terrified. Not like someone caught doing something wrong. More like someone who didn't understand what was happening. Philip picked up his phone again. His finger hovered over her contact. He could call her. Ask questions. Hear her explanation. But another thought stopped him. What if the explanation only made things worse? His chest tightened again. Instead, he locked his phone and dropped it back onto the seat. He stepped out of the car and walked toward the nearby park. The morning air was cool. People jogged along the path while others walked their dogs. Normal life. Normal happiness. Things that suddenly felt very far away from him. Philip sat down on a bench and stared at the ground. In his pocket was the empty velvet ring box. He pulled it out slowly. Opening it again made his chest ache. The ring was gone. Left behind in that hotel room. Just like the future he thought he had with Grace. He closed the box and held it tightly in his hand. I loved you, he whispered quietly. The words hung in the cold air. But deep inside his heart, a small voice refused to stay silent. What if she was telling the truth?
Philip didn't know it yet, but somewhere else in the city, Grace and Kang Jiho had already begun uncovering the truth behind that mysterious night. And soon, Philip would have to decide whether he was willing to listen, or lose the woman he loved forever. The luxurious hotel suite had grown quiet again. Grace sat nervously on the edge of the sofa, now fully dressed in the clothes she had gathered from the chair earlier. Even though she had managed to compose herself, her fingers kept twisting together anxiously. Across the room, Kang Jiho stood near the window, his phone pressed to his ear.
His voice was calm but firm.
"I want the hotel's security footage from last night," he said. "From the lobby, elevators, and this floor."
There was a short pause.
"Yes," he added, "every camera." Grace watched him, unsure whether to feel relieved or more nervous. Jiho ended the call and turned toward her. "They'll send it in a few minutes," he said.
Grace nodded slowly. Her stomach still felt like it was tied in knots.
Part of her was terrified of what they might discover.
But another part desperately needed the truth.
"I just want to know what happened,"
she said quietly. Jiho studied her for a moment. "You will," he replied.
His tone carried a confidence that made her feel slightly calmer. A soft notification sound came from his phone. Jiho walked to the table and opened the file that had just been sent. Within seconds, the hotel's security footage appeared on the screen. He sat down and gestured for Grace to come closer. She moved beside him, her heart pounding as the video began to play. The first clip showed the hotel lobby from the previous night. Elegant guests moved in and out of the building. Businessmen shook hands. Couples laughed near the reception desk. Everything looked normal. Jiho fast-forwarded the footage. Minutes passed quickly on the screen. Then suddenly, Grace gasped. "There," she whispered. The camera showed her entering the hotel lobby. But something was wrong. She looked unsteady. Her steps were slow and uneven, as if she was struggling to stay balanced. Two unfamiliar men were walking beside her, each holding one of her arms. Grace's heart began racing. "That's me." Jiho paused the video and leaned closer. "You look barely conscious," he said. Grace swallowed hard. "I don't remember any of this." Jiho resumed the footage. The two men guided her toward the elevator. Her head hung slightly forward, and she didn't appear to be speaking. She looked completely unaware of where she was. Grace covered her mouth with her hand. "Oh my God." Jiho's expression grew serious. "This isn't normal behavior." The video switched to another camera angle. The elevator. The same two men stood beside Grace as the elevator doors closed. She swayed slightly, and one of them had to steady her. Jiho frowned. "They were definitely helping you, or controlling you." Grace felt a chill run down her spine. "Do you think I was drugged?" Jiho didn't answer immediately. Instead, he skipped ahead to the next footage. This one showed the hallway on his floor. The elevator doors opened. The two men stepped out with Grace between them. They walked straight toward Jiho's suite. Grace's breathing became uneven. "Why would they bring me to your room?" Jiho leaned forward slightly. "That's what we're about to find out." They watched as the two men reached the door. One of them knocked. A few seconds passed. Then something unexpected happened. A hotel employee appeared and unlocked the door for them. Jiho paused the footage instantly. His eyes narrowed slightly. "That's strange." Grace looked at the screen. "What is?" Jiho pointed at the employee. "I don't recognize him." Grace frowned. "But he works at the hotel, right?" Jiho shook his head slowly. "I've stayed here many times. I know most of the senior staff." He zoomed in on the employee's face. "This person isn't one of them." Grace felt her stomach drop. "So someone helped them get into your room?" Jiho nodded. "That's what it looks like." The footage continued. The men carried Grace inside the room. The door closed behind them. Then after a few minutes, they walked out again. Alone. Grace stared at the screen in horror. "They just left me there." Jiho paused the video again. The room fell silent. Both of them understood what they had just watched. Grace had not gone to that room willingly. Someone had placed her there. Her hands trembled slightly. "Someone wanted me to wake up in your bed," she whispered. Jiho leaned back in his chair. His expression was thoughtful. "And someone made sure your boyfriend would find you." Grace's heart skipped. "What do you mean?" Jiho looked at her calmly. "Think about the timing.
You wake up here.
Your boyfriend arrives with a ring. And everything falls apart instantly. Grace's breathing slowed as the realization sank in. This wasn't an accident.
Jiho nodded.
It was carefully planned.
The room suddenly felt colder.
Grace's mind began racing.
Who would do something like this?
Who hated her enough to destroy her relationship?
Then a face appeared in her mind.
Vanessa.
Her co-worker.
The woman who had always been overly friendly with Philip. The same woman who handed her the drink the night before. Grace's eyes widened.
No.
Jiho noticed the change in her expression immediately. You just thought of someone. Grace hesitated for a moment. Then she nodded slowly. There's someone at my office.
Jiho folded his arms.
Someone who doesn't like you.
Grace looked down.
She's always been jealous of my promotion. And she's always been a little too interested in my boyfriend.
Jiho leaned forward slightly.
What's her name?
Grace took a deep breath.
Vanessa.
Jiho nodded slowly.
Well, he said calmly, if she's responsible for this.
His eyes hardened slightly.
She made a very big mistake. For the first time since the nightmare began that morning, Grace felt something she hadn't felt in hours. Hope. Because the truth was finally starting to reveal itself. And somewhere in the city, Philip still had no idea that the woman he believed betrayed him was actually the victim of a carefully planned trap.
The cafe was quiet when Grace arrived.
It was late afternoon, and soft sunlight streamed through the large glass windows, casting long golden shadows across the wooden tables.
Normally, she loved places like this. Calm. Peaceful.
But today, her chest felt tight with anxiety. She spotted Philip sitting alone at a table near the corner.
His posture was stiff.
His elbows rested on the table, and his hands were clasped together tightly as he stared down at something in front of him. Grace paused for a moment before walking toward him.
Her heart pounded louder with every step.
When she finally reached the table, Philip slowly looked up. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The silence between them felt heavy.
Different from before. Colder. Grace sat down carefully across from him.
Thank you for coming, she said softly. Philip nodded slightly but didn't smile.
Just tell me the truth, he said.
His voice was calm, but there was pain beneath it.
Grace swallowed.
I've been trying to tell you since this morning.
Philip leaned back slightly in his chair.
I saw you in another man's bed, Grace. The words landed like a heavy weight between them. She looked down briefly before lifting her eyes again.
I know how it looked, she said quietly. But I didn't go there willingly. Philip frowned slightly. What does that mean?
Instead of answering immediately, Grace reached into her bag and pulled out Kang Jiho's tablet.
She placed it gently on the table between them.
Just watch this first.
Philip hesitated for a moment. Then he picked up the tablet. The video began playing. At first, his expression remained guarded. But as the footage continued, his face slowly began to change. The lobby footage appeared. V being escorted by two strange men.
Her unsteady steps. Her barely conscious posture.
Philip leaned forward slightly.
Wait, pause that.
Grace paused the video.
Philip stared at the screen.
That's you, he said. She nodded.
I don't remember any of it.
Philip resumed the video.
The elevator scene appeared next.
Then the hallway footage. The men guiding her toward Kang Jiho's suite. Philip's jaw tightened.
They were holding you up, he said quietly.
Yes. The video showed the hotel employee unlocking the door. Then the two men carrying her inside. Finally, the footage ended with them leaving the room alone. Philip placed the tablet back on the table slowly.
He leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his face.
So you were drugged, he said.
Grace nodded. That's what it looks like.
Philip exhaled slowly. His emotions were clearly shifting. Shock. Confusion. Anger.
But this time, the anger wasn't directed at Grace. Who would do something like this? He asked.
Grace hesitated.
There's someone I suspect.
Philip looked at her again.
Who? Vanessa.
Philip's brows furrowed.
Your co-worker.
Grace nodded.
She was the one who gave me my drink at the celebration last night.
Philip's mind began connecting the pieces. Vanessa had always been around more than necessary. Always volunteering to help.
Always asking questions about his relationship with Grace.
And now, the idea made his stomach turn.
She's always been jealous of my promotion, Grace continued quietly. And she's always flirted with you when I wasn't around. Philip looked uncomfortable. I thought she was just being friendly.
Grace gave a sad smile.
I thought so too at first.
The cafe grew quiet again. Philip stared down at the table.
I almost threw everything away, he said softly.
Grace's voice trembled slightly.
You already did.
The words hung heavily in the air. Philip looked up quickly.
Pain flickered across his face.
I walked out on you, he admitted.
Yes.
His shoulders dropped slightly.
I didn't even give you a chance to explain.
Grace blinked back, the tears forming in her eyes.
That morning destroyed me, Philip.
Her voice cracked slightly.
I woke up confused, scared, and the man I love looked at me like I was a stranger.
Philip looked down again. Guilt slowly crept into his expression.
I was hurt, he said quietly. I know. I thought I lost you. Grace's eyes filled with tears. You almost did.
Philip clenched his jaw. The truth was finally clear now. Grace had been set up, manipulated, used as part of someone else's cruel plan. And he had nearly let that plan succeed. He took a deep breath.
Is Kang Jiho the one who got this footage?
Yes. Philip nodded slowly. I owe that man a thank you. Grace wiped her eyes gently.
He said the truth deserves to be known.
Philip leaned back in his chair again.
For the first time since that terrible morning, the situation finally made sense.
But the damage it had caused between them was still there. Trust once broken doesn't heal instantly. Philip looked at Grace again. His voice softer now.
I'm sorry. Grace didn't respond immediately. Instead, she stared at the cup of untouched coffee in front of her. Because even though the truth was finally coming out, her heart was still trying to recover from the moment she saw the man she loved walk away. The next morning, Grace woke up feeling emotionally exhausted. The past 24 hours had been a whirlwind of confusion, heartbreak, and painful revelations. Her mind still replayed everything that had happened. The hotel room, Philip's devastated face, the security footage, and the realization that someone had deliberately destroyed her life. She sat quietly at her small apartment dining table, staring at her phone. Philip's apology at the cafe had been sincere, but things still felt fragile between them.
Trust had cracks now. And cracks take time to mend. Her phone suddenly buzzed. The name on the screen surprised her. Kang Jiho. She answered quickly.
Hello.
Jiho's calm voice came through the phone.
We found them.
Grace sat up straight.
Found who? The two men from the hotel footage.
Her heart began beating faster. How? Jiho replied simply.
I have people who are very good at finding answers. Within an hour, Grace was sitting in a quiet conference room inside one of Jiho's corporate buildings. The room was sleek and modern, with tall glass windows overlooking the city. Jiho stood near the table, his hands resting calmly in his pockets. Across from them sat two nervous men. The same men from the security footage. Grace recognized them instantly. Her chest tightened. One of the men avoided eye contact completely. The other looked like he regretted every decision he had made in the past week.
Jiho's voice remained calm but firm.
Tell her what you told me.
The taller man swallowed nervously.
We were paid to bring you to the hotel.
Grace's hands clenched slightly.
Paid by who?
The two men glanced at each other briefly. Then the second man spoke.
A woman named Vanessa. Grace felt a heavy knot tighten in her stomach. Even though she had suspected it, hearing the confirmation still hurt.
Why? She asked quietly.
The man shrugged uneasily. She said we just needed to make it look like you spent the night with someone important. To destroy your relationship.
Grace closed her eyes briefly. The cruelty of it all was unbelievable. Just then, the conference room door opened. Philip walked in. Jiho had called him earlier that morning. Philip stopped when he saw the two men sitting there. His expression hardened. So it's true, he said quietly. Jiho nodded slightly.
They've confessed. The taller man quickly added. We didn't hurt her or anything. The woman just told us to slip something into her drink and take her to the hotel room.
Philip's jaw tightened.
You drugged her?
The man lowered his head.
Yes.
Silence filled the room for a moment. Philip slowly looked at Grace.
Seeing her sitting there, still strong despite everything she had been through, made guilt wash over him all over again.
He had doubted her. He had walked away when she needed him most. Meanwhile, Jiho spoke again.
My team has already handed the evidence to the police.
Grace looked up.
They'll arrest Vanessa.
Yes. Almost as if on cue, Jiho's assistant knocked gently on the door. They just confirmed it, she said.
The police picked her up at her office.
Philip shook his head slowly.
All of this, just because she was jealous.
Grace sighed quietly.
Some people will destroy anything they can't have.
Jiho nodded slightly.
Jealousy makes people careless.
The two men were escorted out of the room shortly after. The door closed behind them. Now only 3 people remained inside. Grace, Philip, and Kang Jiho. Philip turned toward Jiho.
I owe you a serious thank you.
Jiho gave a small shrug.
You both deserve the truth.
Philip nodded. Then he looked at Grace again. There was still pain in her eyes. Not just from the betrayal of Vanessa, but from the moment he had walked away from her. He stepped closer. I should have trusted you, he said quietly.
Grace looked at him for a long moment. I needed you to.
Philip didn't try to argue. He simply nodded. Because she was right. Meanwhile, Jiho picked up his jacket. My work here is done, he said calmly. Grace stood up.
Thank you for helping me.
Jiho gave a faint smile.
Sometimes the truth just needs a little push.
He walked toward the door, pausing briefly before leaving. One more thing, he added.
Both Grace and Philip looked at him.
Jiho's expression was thoughtful.
Don't let someone else's cruelty destroy something good between you.
Then he left the room, leaving the two of them standing there alone. And for the first time since everything began, Philip and Grace had the truth. But now they had to decide if the truth was enough to rebuild what had been broken.
3 days passed after Vanessa's arrest. For Grace, those days felt strangely quiet. The storm that had shaken her life so violently had finally settled, but the emotional aftermath still lingered in her heart.
Some things had been cleared up. The truth had been revealed. But healing wasn't something that happened overnight. Trust needed time.
One evening, as Grace sat on the couch in her apartment reading through work emails, her phone buzzed. A message from Philip. She stared at the screen for a moment before opening it. Can we meet tonight?
Her chest tightened slightly.
After the confrontation with the two men, Philip had been gentle and patient, giving her space.
But this message felt important. She replied. Where?
A few seconds later, another message appeared. The restaurant on Maple Street.
Grace froze. Her heart skipped. She knew that place.
It was the same restaurant Philip had reserved for the proposal that never happened.
Her fingers hovered over the phone for a moment. Then she typed back. Okay.
That evening, the restaurant glowed warmly under soft golden lights. Couples chatted quietly over dinner while soft music floated through the air. Grace stepped inside, her nerves slowly building with every step. Her eyes searched the room.
Then she saw him.
Philip was standing near the table by the window. The same table.
The one he had planned everything around.
When he noticed her, he stood up straight.
There was something different about his expression tonight.
Less tension.
More sincerity. Grace walked over slowly and sat down.
For a moment, neither of them spoke.
The silence wasn't uncomfortable though. Just heavy with emotion. Philip finally broke it.
Thank you for coming.
Grace nodded gently.
You said you wanted to talk.
Philip took a slow breath.
I've been doing a lot of thinking these past few days.
He looked down briefly before meeting her eyes again.
Grace, I handled everything terribly that morning.
She didn't interrupt. I should have listened to you, he continued.
I should have stayed.
His voice softened.
But instead, I let my anger and pain make the decision for me. Grace looked down at her hands resting on the table. That morning broke me, Philip.
Her voice trembled slightly.
I woke up confused and scared, and the one person I trusted the most looked at me like I was someone he didn't recognize.
Philip swallowed hard. I know. He reached into his pocket slowly.
Grace's heart began beating faster.
Philip pulled out the small velvet box. The same one that had fallen on the hotel floor. Her eyes widened slightly. He placed it gently on the table.
This ring was supposed to change our lives that morning, he said softly. Grace felt tears forming in her eyes.
Philip stood up from his chair. Then, slowly, he knelt beside the table. The quiet restaurant began noticing what was happening. A few nearby diners turned their heads. Philip opened the velvet box. The diamond sparkled under the warm restaurant lights. Grace, he said gently.
I don't want our story to end because someone tried to destroy it.
His voice was steady now.
You are the strongest, kindest person I know. And even when everything fell apart, you still fought for the truth.
He took a small breath.
I should have fought for you too.
Tears slid down Grace's cheeks as she listened. Philip continued.
If you can find it in your heart to forgive me.
He held up the ring.
Will you marry me? For a moment, the entire restaurant seemed to fall silent.
Every eye in the room was watching. But Grace barely noticed any of them.
All she could see was the man kneeling in front of her.
The man who had broken her heart. And the man who was now trying to put it back together. Her voice trembled slightly.
You really scared me that morning.
Philip nodded quietly. I know. But I still love you, she whispered.
A small hopeful smile appeared on Philip's face.
Grace wiped her tears gently. Then she nodded. Yes. The word was soft. But powerful. Yes, Philip. I'll marry you. Applause suddenly erupted around the restaurant.
People smiled and clapped as Philip carefully slid the ring onto her finger.
He stood up and pulled her into a warm embrace.
Grace laughed through her tears as she hugged him back tightly. At another table across the restaurant, a familiar figure watched quietly.
Kang Jiho.
He had stopped by the restaurant for dinner after a late meeting. When he noticed what was happening, a small smile crossed his face. He raised his glass slightly in their direction before standing up to leave.
Sometimes the truth didn't just reveal lies. Sometimes it saved love. And tonight, love had won.